We, the tech enthusiasts, are a divided group of people, and more than anything, it is our mobile operating system preferences that set us apart. But if there's one thing we can all agree on, it is the fact that stock Android is the only good Android. So why isn't everyone using it then? I'm Martin from TechAltar. This is the 5th episode of the Story Behind series, and let's investigate. It is common knowledge by now that if you are a real smartphone enthusiast, you can't enjoy iOS and Android and maybe, just maybe, even Windows Phone at the same time. That means you're a weirdo and a pretender. But stock Android is something we can all agree on, right? I mean, most reviewers judge the quality of phone software by simply saying how close to stock it is. And apparently most people commenting on their videos seem to agree too. But take a look at this. Last year and this year, these 6 Android makers made it to the top 5 worldwide. What do you see? Well, other than the fact that 5 of these 6 are from China, which I have made a separate video about that you can see right here, it's also apparent that none of these companies focus on Android versions that are anywhere near stock Android. Samsung has TouchWiz, which has gotten a little bit more stock lately, but to be honest, it's still quite far away from it. Huawei has Emotion UI, which sometimes looks closer to iOS than it does to stock, and Oppo's ColorOS together with Vivo's FunTouch OS take the iOS similarities to a whole new level. Lenovo's Vibe UI, well, I don't know, just definitely not stock. And Xiaomi had MIUI before they even had phones, and they see the customization and the fact that it's so different from stock as a core selling point. Sure, I know, Huawei makes the Nexus 6P and Lenovo owns Motorola, which kind of uses stock, but for the most part these companies are trying to do everything in their power to stay away from it. And sales numbers don't lie, it currently seems to be the winning strategy. But hey, I can make it even weirder. What about the phones that do use stock Android, or at least are close to it? I can think of a few. Of course, we can start with the Nexus line, and there is the 6P. I'm not a big fan of the design, but it sure as hell is one of the best phones money can buy. So it should be quite competitive, right? Well, I tried googling something like Nexus sales figures, and all I could find were reasons why the Nexus line isn't really selling well. But okay, maybe Google just doesn't want to discourage manufacturing partners by competing too hard. I have an idea. Manufacturers should just keep making hardware and slap stock Android on it. That would be perfect, no? Well, remember how Google Play Edition phones were exactly that? Customers could get hardware from like HTC or Samsung running pure stock Android. And turns out there was so little interest in this program that it had to close down quite quickly. Google's other stock Android project was Android One, which was supposed to bring clean stock Android to developing markets and cheap devices. And I think you're starting to see a pattern. It has sadly failed to make a big dent. You could easily argue that Google is to blame here, and maybe they're just much better at writing code than they are at selling phones, and that I think would be a fair assumption. But maybe it's even more worrying that on the large scale of things, as far as I can tell, no company has really benefited from listening to us techies screaming at them that we hate their UIs and that they should embrace stock Android instead. I think Motorola did it first, the tech crowd loved it, and then Google sold the brand to Lenovo for $10 billion less than they had bought it for just a few years ago. These Google guys are pretty terrible at selling phones, aren't they? And then HTC made sense, clean and close to stock and beautiful and, well, they aren't doing too well, I guess. But Sony's software skin has always been fairly close to stock and they even have an AOSP ROM and, well, I guess I haven't seen them in a top 5 or a top 10 in years. And there are interesting small startups like OnePlus and Nextbit that do use fairly stock Android, and maybe they are doing pretty well, but guess what? They are niche brands for us, the tech crowd, and compared to the likes of Samsung and Huawei, they are just so tiny. Okay, no more examples. I think the trend is pretty clear. Even though we, the people who know quite a lot about smartphones, seem to agree that stock Android is the lord and savior of all smartphones, the market seems to think the complete opposite. So could it be that we are wrong and maybe stock Android isn't as good as we think it is? No, we're professionals, we're never wrong. But I do think there is a lesson to be learned here. Stock Android is actually better than ever before. It has a consistent design language, it performs well, and it has all the features an average user needs. I actually talked to a friend of mine from Paranoid Android who agreed with me that custom ROMs like Paranoid Android and CyanogenMod are slowly dying, in part because of how stock is just good enough. There's not a whole lot more that custom ROM makers can meaningfully add to your experience. So why then aren't manufacturer skins dying too? There are of course a lot of reasons for it. One of them being that manufacturer skins are actually getting better too, and some of them are far from terrible. But the one I saw the most when I worked in the smartphone industry is differentiation. The thing is, smartphones have matured to the point where all of them are more or less the same. A big slab with a touchscreen on the front and a camera on both sides. They have camera sensors from Sony or Samsung, a CPU from Qualcomm or MediaTek, and so on. Unless you are a power user, it essentially doesn't matter which one you buy, and it's incredibly hard to make a phone that breaks away from these standards in any meaningful way without resorting to gimmicks these days. Curved screens and modular designs are desperate attempts to stand out, and more often than not, they end up being very costly experiments rather than real selling points. But in a market where most phones seem to be more or less the same, companies are desperate to find ways to differentiate, and when hardware innovation is risky, expensive, and often gimmicky, apparently smartphone makers feel the need to customize their software for the sake of differentiation, even if in reality in most cases, stock Android would have delivered a better experience. And customers seem to be buying this, so unless that changes, smartphone makers will keep abusing Android. Fun fact, my favorite Android skins are those from Sony and HTC because I feel they're close enough to stock, yet unique enough so I feel the manufacturer has put enough thought into them. Let me know in the comment section below what your favorite version of Android is. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more investigative tech videos from the story behind, just like this one. And also follow me on the socials, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.